Welcome to our Flex Plan overview for instructors. My name is Christy Orr. I'm the Director of Disability Resources. And this is Justin Romack. He's going to do the majority of the presenting here. Quick little update for you all. We are here and functioning. Our offices are open as normally would be. However, we are not in our regular offices. So you may or may not have heard that we had a small fire on the second floor of our building, and we're on the first floor. So we did not have fire damage, but we did have water damage. So we are all in different locations, and so a little technical trouble as we still get used to our new
And you guys to see what
workspaces
Dr.
here.
Christie or what?
Oh, okay. And so we're going to get started. We do have, it'll probably take us a full hour to get through the presentation. And with that, would like to ask that if you have questions, if you will put them in the chat, we will be answering them probably towards the end, unless there's something that I want to interrupt Justin and ask him. But we really appreciate you being here for this important topic. It is about the Flex Plan overview for instructors. We are recording the session. If there are, leaving the questions till the end will help us also cut those questions out if we feel like we want to not have those shared, because we will be sharing them with other people who are interested but not available to come at this time. Okay, so Justin, I think I'm ready for the next slide. Okay, so disability related absences. Just to let you know a little bit more about that. Anyone want to throw some things in the chat about why students might miss class that would be related to a disability? Anything you can think of? And I'll give you some examples, but what kind of disability? Exactly. You got it. So migraines, anxiety disorder. So doctor's appointments, typically no. So that would normally not be a disability related absence unless it's a specialist and they can only actually come at certain times, and we might work with them on that. Chronic illness definitely could be. Surgery maybe. Pregnancy or childbirth would, yes, but that would not go through our office. So that would go through the Title IX office. Autoimmune flare up, anything that is flares up, usually we hear that a lot. So typically, not always, but typically they are chronic conditions that are episodic in nature. So they're able to come to class and then something happens and they miss class. And it really doesn't make sense for them to go to a doctor. So usually talk about migraines because people usually have a good idea of what a migraine is like. If you have migraines, you don't go to the doctor every time you have a migraine. You take your medication, you rest, you take care of yourself, and then you come back. And so it doesn't make sense for a student to go get an excuse from the doctor. So that's where they work with our office, so that us knowing that they have that disability, it excuses the absence when it is a disability related reason. So like all accommodations with our office, there is a process for requesting it. Students submit an application to our office through our website, and they submit documentation to us. And then they meet with an access coordinator in our office. So the access coordinators are assigned by college primarily, and they work with them in an interactive process so that they can determine the appropriate accommodations, and they provide the student with information about how to utilize their accommodations. So I will say, so I mentioned that a flare up. So then a flare up would be, I'm trying to read the question. They keep coming, so then it's harder to read it. So what do you mean by flare schedule? Okay, so we're going to get to a little bit later about what happens if there are multiple reschedules. We can talk about that kind of at the end, but we will get to those questions. Okay, Justin. So what we do in our office, we have an accommodation that we call Plan for Absences. And basically what that means is it's a way for us to figure out what is a reasonable accommodation for a student that may miss class because of their disability. And it's reasonable flexibility for those disability related absences. Having Plan for Absences as an accommodation is not an open invitation to miss every class or even to miss a lot of classes. It really is trying to figure out what's reasonable and how do we account for those disability related absences. And flexibility is determined by the class, not by individual student needs. So we've been talking a lot in our office about being able to get the educational benefit of a class. So, how much can you miss before it actually means that you're not getting the educational benefit of the class? So, it really doesn't matter if your disability means that you're going to miss three-fourths of the class. What matters is if you miss three-fourths of the class, are you missing too much? And you're not going to be able to get the benefit of it or not of the material that's presented in the class. And that accommodation needs to be informed by faculty feedback and your usage data. So we are not going to tell you how much is reasonable for a student to miss. We are going to work with you on figuring that out because it may be you say they can't miss any classes. Well, then we're going to question that. What happens if somebody has a flu?
Mhm.
What happens if they have a car accident? So we really are trying to figure out how much is enough to miss and not too much. And then we do have a link to more information. I'll put that in the chat also, but we're going to put some links here that may be helpful as we go along and how we manage that accommodation.
And I do plan on sending a recap with some of these links, so don't feel like you got to catch it all or write it all down. I promise that you will have a copy of both this recording and the links. So yeah, I appreciate Christy sort of teeing it up because we are trying to find what is reasonable flexibility, and those may feel like squishy terms. They're kind of abstract, they're subjective. Um, but really, I come back to this question when I meet with instructors, when I meet with students. How do you support students in your courses who experience a university approved excused absence? Let's take disability, let's take accommodation out of the equation, right? How are you managing this process for any student who has an excused absence for any reason, who's bringing you appropriate documentation, who's following notification processes and timelines? Because a lot of times when we think about flex plan and how this accommodation works, we're really just kind of reporting out what we're doing for any other student so that it's clear and that students can hook into that process. So plan for absences does support a reasonable number of absences as excused absences. And we'll talk about the connection to Student Rule 7 and why that's important. Reasonable is defined by the default accommodation guidelines, which appear in the letter, or course specific guidelines based on activities and expectations? And is there a point where even excused absences hinder progress and completion? Because the goal is not, as Christy said, to have this boundless number of absences and flexibility. It is intended, the accommodation is intended to set up clear parameters about how flexibility could work in that class for all students because progress and completion are really our goal. They're your goal, they're our goal, and we want to make sure that the accommodation supports those. So, one of my favorite things about working with this accommodation over the last couple of years is that we have a ton of data on how the accommodation fits our office, how our students are using it, um, alongside context across the institution. And so, what data points do we have on plan for absences? Well, our office saw a 47.4% growth from fall 2021 to fall 2025. That level of growth was actually greater than the level of growth that the overall institution saw, which was 11% in that same time period. Students with plan for absences represented 16.4% of total affiliated students. So that's 16.4% of the students affiliated with our office in fall 2021 had the accommodation of plan for absences. That number dropped to 7.9% in fall of 2025. You see that that's 517 students. And I share these data points because a lot of times it does feel like we're seeing more students have this accommodation, and the data would say we're not. We're actually seeing fewer students. And I think there's a reason, there's a couple of reasons for that. I think that there's a number of accommodations that we use differently now to address barriers in the classroom and with class policy. So I think that that's part of it. There's also a better awareness as we work with students about how to coach them on those alternative options. And so this may be a tool that we have turned to. I think we're just using the accommodation in a very different way now. And so that number has gone down over time. So to be clear, plan for absences is the accommodation. Flex plan is the communication tool. And we're going to unpack that communication tool, how it works, how you work with it most effectively, how your students will use it as we go through the remainder of this session. But what is Flex Plan? It's a communication tool to identify course policies and potential flexibility and how how the plan for absences accommodation is facilitated in your class. It's also going to aid necessary processes to support the accommodations connection to Student Rule 7. It provides notification both to you and our office when those disability related absences occur. And it makes expectations clear from the beginning. Clear is kind. Transparency, realistic expectation management from the get go is what makes this accommodation work most effectively. And so FlexPlan really helps us bridge the gap between what is the accommodation, what does it look like in the course, and how do we support both instructor and student throughout the semester. Why FlexPlan? Why do we start using this in fall of 2025? Why do we pilot it even in summer of 2025? Well, it really all starts back with some data gathered in summer of 2024. We surveyed instructors who had a student in their class during the spring 2024 semester, and we got about 230 instructors that responded and gave us some feedback on what their experience was like. 37% of those instructors said, we have challenges with this accommodation, right? And they specifically said that communication and clear expectations were the biggest barriers they were running into as they supported students in facilitating that accommodation. So we knew something had to happen with the communication tools around this accommodation. Um, the benefit of FlexPlan is that it does support that proactive, transparent, and collaborative discussion on the accommodation. We use a questionnaire in FlexPlan that learns a little bit more about your class. And on the back end, the student submits a notification and request when they need to use the accommodation. So it becomes clear, becomes collaborative as the student uses it. And at this last bullet point, the Office of Civil Rights really says that students shouldn't be in the position to negotiate the details of how an accommodation works in a specific class. That isn't to say that students aren't self-advocates. It isn't to say that students aren't involved in discussion. But what it does say is when we get down into the minutia about how many absences work for a class, if there are concerns about how the accommodation fits, the student shouldn't be put in the position to where they're having to negotiate between 5 and 4, right? That's for our office. And so FlexPlan inserts us into the conversation early so that our office, instructor, and student know how the accommodation works, and any challenges are addressed early and with our office directly. So I'm going to come at you with data because I love it. I think it's helpful. What data do we have on FlexPlan? So it's in a system. We're able to measure, assess a lot of interaction points with FlexPlan. And so the last academic year, we launched FlexPlan in fall of 2025. We ran it spring of 26. And during the last academic year, fall and spring, this slide says 2,400. We actually reviewed and approved over 2,500 plans during the fall and spring semesters of last year. So these are plans for individual courses. So 2,500 individual courses had a plan that was tied to an accommodation. The plan for absences accommodation. 2,264 disability related absence notifications were submitted by students to say, hey, I need to use this accommodation in my class. And from that 2,264, we see that on average across classes, students use the accommodation 2.55 times in a class, and right around 76% use the accommodation 3 or fewer times in a class. This data is really important. I think a lot of times we think about sort of the chaotic situations where, and it doesn't even have to be disability or accommodation, where when we say flexibility and students like not there for half of the semester, that's not the kind of flexibility we're advocating for, and it's not the kind of flexibility that's being operationalized by the accommodation. The data would suggest that most students use this accommodation 3 or fewer times, right? That's not to say that there aren't a handful of students that do request more flexibility, But it is to say that by the majority, most students don't interact with that difficulty. And so I would just say that when we say that there's limits and there are boundaries and there are guidelines, this is how students use it in practice. And I think that data is really important to contextualize how we use the accommodation. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the flex plan process, right? And so we're going to dig into each of these steps as we go along, but at a high level, 30,000 foot view, what are we doing with flex plan from start to finish? One bullet point that is not in here that's sort of implicit is student is approved for accommodation. And so Christy talked a little bit about that. We review documentation, we engage with student. We're making sure that there is a barrier that necessitates a need for attendance flexibility, right? And so that is implicit in this process. When students request their accommodations at the beginning of the semester, they're going to request the plan for absences accommodation. That sets the whole process in motion because once they've requested that accommodation for their accommodation letters, that opens the Flex Plan portal for that course and that student. So, first step, requesting the accommodation. Second step, instructor receives the accommodation letter, and there is a link to fill out a flex plan. There's a series of reminders to complete that flex plan over a 2-week period. The sooner an instructor fills it out, the sooner those reminders stop. It's an automated sequence, so it's not like I sit at my computer thinking about how many emails I'm going to send to people that day. But there is a reminder that is sent within a day that says, hey, we need this flex plan for the course. And what AIM does intelligently, AIM, our accommodations portal, what it does intelligently is it groups your classes. So if you have multiple classes that require a flex plan, it will group that into one email so that you don't get, 10 different emails for all of the sections that you might teach of that course. So you'll get the email, it will prompt you to fill out a flex plan. Instructor completes the flex plan questionnaire in their flex plan portal inside of AIM. It's going to ask questions about what does attendance look like in your class? What are some of the activities? How do you handle makeups? How do we actually make this accommodation work for your class? There are 7 questions, and I'll show you those questions here in a minute. But you'll fill out that questionnaire, and that questionnaire gets routed to our office where it is reviewed, each and every one of them, line by line, carefully, thoughtfully, intentionally, right? And when we review that, we may make comments or ask clarifying questions just to make sure we understand how it works in practice. Because we work with students and multiple instructors across multiple situations, sometimes we're going to see, hey, you said this. What does that mean? What if the student does this? How would we handle that situation? So that's the collaboration that I talked about earlier. It's not necessarily challenging, though sometimes we might question, hey, you say 0. Let's talk about that a little bit. But it genuinely is meant to be a very collaborative, iterative process between you and our office so that when that plan gets approved, there really isn't a lot of room to say, well, it wasn't in the plan, right? We'll review, we'll approve. You and your student will both get a copy of that completed plan, and it is also saved in their Flex Plan dashboard so that they are able to get through to it throughout the semester, right? So we've got a plan in place, and we're at week 3, and student has a disability flare, and they need to use the accommodation. So one step that I think we've learned through discussion with faculty is that they may not realize students are expected to log into their own Flex Plan portal and log those absences. So what a student will do is say, hey, I need to use this accommodation. It fits the parameters of the plan. And they submit what is called a disability related absence notification request inside of their AIM student portal. When they submit that, it's asking them a couple of simple questions. What was the date of the absence? What sort of flexibility are you requesting? Was it just an excused absence? Is it a makeup exam? How is the flexibility being applied? And then the really important question, because we're going to tie this back to Student Rule 7, where in relation to the class or the activity is this absence occurring, right? When is the notification being made? Are you notifying in advance, like Student Rule 7 says? Is it the same day? Is it within 2 business days, which Student Rule 7 also offers an avenue for? Knowing when the absence happens and when that request is being made helps you know how it fits Student Rule 7, right? So that notification gets submitted by the student. Both the instructor and the access coordinator receive a copy of that. Now, those can be reviewed. They can be approved if they match the plan. If there are questions or concerns, the instructor has the opportunity to dispute that request. And when a dispute happens, that brings us into the discussion. The student's access coordinator reaches out to you. Let's get a little bit more information. They reach out to the student. Hey, what's going on? Your instructor said this. Can you tell me a little bit more? And we enter that resolution process so that we're collecting all of the facts, giving you information, then to make a final decision. Generally that's us saying, hey, instructor, you're right. Like, this is a concern. How would you handle this with another student? Or instructor, you're totally right. We can't advocate for this. The problem that would happen in the past, and why FlexPlan becomes and continues to be so important, is that we would often get brought into conversations weeks, months after these situations happened. And this allows us to be a partner in solving problems in the moment so that you and your student can both move forward successfully in the semester. And then I would just finally say there's a history of usage that gets logged to your FlexPlan portal as well as the students so that we can see how that accommodation is being used across the semester. And when we're reaching that point where it might be the limits of the plan. And I kind of hunker down on this point for a second because we are able to run weekly reports of how students are using the accommodation. When they're going in and submitting their requests, each week I will run a report and I will send that to our access coordinators to say, hey, here's how your students are using this. We have not often had early alerts on how students are using this accommodation throughout the semester. So, there could be issues that we don't learn about until week 13, 14, 15 during final exam periods. So this allows us to triage and troubleshoot and get the student support, but also get you support in the moment. Because again, moving forward successfully is really the key here. So I told you I'd connected to Student Rule 7, delivering on that promise. I am very familiar with Student Rule 7. Not perfect, but not terrible. I think it sets up a really good framework for university excused absences. And here's how we sort of tie it to that. So disability related absences are supported through the plan for absence accommodation through Student Rule 7.2.1.4. 7.2.1.4 basically says that that absences related to or supported by a disability related accommodation are excused by the university. FlexPlan and the accommodation facilitate that. So there is an expectation of timely notification. Mentioned that earlier, advanced notification and or within 2 business days. That's 7.1.1. And the accommodation mirrors that expectation, right? That has been our goal throughout this process, is to mirror the framework that Student Rule 7 has set up. Okay. And so advanced notification is the expectation. That is what we communicate to students. Sometimes, think of extended illnesses, things of that nature. Advanced notification doesn't happen. And Student Rule 7 says within 2 business days, providing context about why advanced notification didn't happen. And I'm going to tell you, sometimes, oftentimes, almost all the time, that's going to incorporate disability specific information that really needs to go to our office and the access coordinator. So what we have asked students to do is if advanced notification is not possible, they will email their access coordinator about why that didn't happen. Then the access coordinator has context. We can reach out to the instructor and share context that would be relevant to then supporting that absence. Doesn't happen very often because advanced notification is the expectation. I'm going to give you a scenario where this happened last semester. So we had a student who has epilepsy. They had a seizure. They were unsafe as they were walking to class and experiencing this seizure. They didn't submit the notification ahead of time. They submitted it about 20 minutes after class started. And this is a situation where the instructor really wanted that advance notification. Well, the student was unsafe and they needed to get to a space where they could then send that notification safely. They did. We supported it. It doesn't happen very often because, again, that is the expectation. But I wanted you to know maybe some of the scenarios where that would occur. and why just saying no flat out is probably not the right answer. We need to get a little bit more detail. And it may be that, hey, we can't support this because you could have done it. But the only way we find out is having the student email the access coordinator about the context. And then finally, makeup or suitable alternative. 7.4.1, Student Rule 7 does support that, but timely notification and communication have to occur. And so that's what FlexPlan facilitates. So I've got a picture here. This is of the questionnaire. So as I mentioned, FlexPlan opens up. You will consider how the accommodation fits your class. There are 7 questions. Here in about 2 or 3 slides, I'll show you those questions. But the questionnaire is real simple. We try to give you some multiple choice options, some fields if you want to provide some more context. I'll tell you, the more context we have, the more helpful it is when we say yes or no to the plans, or we come back to the drawing board and try to get creative. And so this questionnaire is the most essential piece of this process, because this is how we get on the same page. So let's say you got an email for this webinar and I said, hey, we know that you have a student with this accommodation. They may or may not have requested it yet, but they do. The best time to think about a plan is ahead of time. And so AIM actually offers through FlexPlan an option to submit a questionnaire in advance for your class. So if you were to go into your FlexPlan portal inside of the AIM instructor portal, you would probably see that there's courses without requests here, and you're more than welcome to submit a plan in advance of a request. Here's the beautiful thing. We review it, we approve it, and it's ready to go when the student requests it. And so there's not a delay in any of that. This disability-related absence notification request, this is what the student will go through when they experience a disability-related absence. This is their communication to you. Really, it's kind of that doctor's note, right? What is the documentation you need to excuse the absence? The student is still expected to communicate directly with you to talk through any content that they missed, any makeups that they're working through, but this is that documentation piece that Student Rule 7 expects. Again, you get an email, we get an email, it's logged to the FlexPlan portal. So I wanted to talk a little bit about changes in fall of 2026. I panicked for a second because my screen reader, I thought it said fall of 2025. And I was like, that's embarrassing. Fall of 2026. So we made a couple of changes, and all of these changes are really intended to expedite the process for everybody. If your inbox looks anything like mine, which I know it does, nobody has time for email reminders to get things done. Like, the quicker we can respond to these things, the quicker we can be about the business of what we're here to do in academe, which is learn and to collaborate, right? So let's get about that. So changes for fall of 2026. We did change the default guidelines for the plan for absences accommodation. There are 2 points that changed. I'll point those out. Previously, the default guideline for number of absences read double the number of absences listed on the syllabus. And that guideline was really informed by a faculty working group that met during the summer of 2025. Excellent insight. We got to a really good spot. Where the rubber met the road in the subsequent semesters is that was actually really difficult to operationalize. Why is that difficult to operationalize? Double the number of absences listed in the syllabus. Well, what if your syllabus doesn't list a number of absences, right? And so there isn't a number to operate. There's not a number to double. What about this accommodation? It's excused absences. Well, most of the time we list unexcused absences. I don't know anybody who's listing a number of excused absences. So in practice, this was difficult to implement. So what did we do to solve that? We use data. We have data from over 2,500 flex plans over the last year, and a majority of those flex plans landed in a spot something like double the number of weekly class sessions, okay? So your once a week becomes 2 absences. Your Tuesday, Thursday becomes 4. Your Monday, Wednesday, Friday becomes 6, right? Roughly about 13% across all sort of frequency types. But double the number of weekly class sessions has become the default with plan for absences. Now, that doesn't mean your flex plan couldn't read something differently, but the default guideline suggests that as a suitable solution for most classes. You know your class better than I do. And so the reality is if it doesn't, use the flex plan to tell us why it doesn't fit. That's exactly what it's intended for. The second change, and I'll skip down to the third bullet point because it's relevant to this third bullet point. We implemented auto submit and auto confirm processes. Auto submit is critical for the instructor side. So the accommodation language basically says that the instructor has 2 weeks after receiving this accommodation letter to complete a flex plan for the course. If a plan is not submitted, the default guidelines will be used. This is a really thoughtful process of landing on this because it's important that we have a plan on file. Why is it important that we have a plan on file? If we don't have a plan, then the student can't meet their responsibility to notify you through FlexPlan, and that is critical to us. If we're going to be a partner in supporting flexible attendance, we have to have data to be able to support instructors. And so without a plan, we don't have that data. We don't know where the student's at. We don't know how they're using the accommodation, and we can't help you. So auto submit basically says after 2 weeks, we use the default guidelines. In my experience, if there are issues with the default guidelines, I hear about that within about 48 hours of getting the accommodation letter. And I understand that. I understand that. A lot of classes have different expectations and activities that attendance really could impact. And so 2 weeks is sort of that expectation. AIM will auto submit that plan, and then that's what becomes operational. We can always talk, but that is sort of the plan. Auto confirm is the student side of this. So I mentioned the disability related absence notifications that students will submit when they need to use the accommodation. And while we were getting hung up on approving plans, and most of the time it was about 200 or 300 plans that went without response last semester, we also had difficulties getting responses on absence notifications. And I largely think it's because it's a new thing and inboxes are super busy. But absence notifications went unattended. And so auto confirm basically says if a student submits their request in a reasonable time frame, which you said on your questionnaire, by the way, if they submit in a reasonable time frame and the request matches your plan, we will auto confirm that if you've given us that guidance on your flex plan questionnaire. We won't touch them if you say you want to handle them, but if you say yes, you can do this, if they submit it in advance, same day, within 2 business days, then we will auto confirm those, because what that will do is that will stop email reminders for you to have to go in and confirm them. That does not mean that we can't have a conversation about a request, but it does mean we're trying to remove some of that administrative burden because we know inboxes are busy. I'm going to jump back up to the second bullet point, which talks about the revised FlexPlan questionnaire. Y'all, I agonized over the length of the questionnaire. I think that the questions are short. I think that there are lots of multiple choice selections, but I really wanted to take 7 questions to 5 or 6. We kept it at 7 questions. But what we did do is we changed some of the questions to allow us to have more context about maybe how you arrived at some of the answers on your plan. So a good example, question 1 on the questionnaire asks about how many absences might be reasonable. And when we have just a number without any context about what your class is, then it's hard to know whether that makes sense or not. So question 2 will now talk about activities in that class. And they're just check boxes. This is a lecture class. I do presentations. There are peer review activities. There's in-class discussion. You check off those activities that contribute toward the grade, and then it helps us contextualize the responses on your other questions. Then I added the question about auto confirm, which I mentioned below, and then that got us to 7. And I'm going to show you those questions on the next slide, but that was a change to the questionnaire. The only other thing that I would say changed is we have, and we will continue to do, and we will continue to strengthen our coaching for students. It's new to you all, and it's new to them, right? And so a lot of this was just being gracious with one another to figure out where those barriers were. We've got a good approach for how to talk about this with students now. So a couple of things that we're doing is that we have kind of some strategic and structured ways that we're talking about it in new student appointments. And then also we implemented what's called the Flex Plan Guidelines and Expectations Acknowledgement, that when students request plan for absences, AIM prompts them to read, review, and acknowledge a statement of their responsibilities for the accommodation in the Flex Plan. And so we are excited to see, does that make a difference in how this accommodation is used during fall 2026? And I think you all will help us find that out. So I think that, putting this resource in their pathway is going to arm them with information about how to use this most effectively, and that's really what we all need in the process. So, Flex Plan questionnaire, 7 questions. Most of them, about half of them are required. There are a couple that are not required. But the 7 questions are this: how many disability related absences may be excused through the accommodation? Remember, they're excused absences under Student Rule 7. And that guiding question is, how do you manage and conceptualize excused absences for any student in your class? And so I would think about that as you look at this question. Which graded course activities may be affected by that absence, right? So we've got a lengthy list of course activities, and then there's a lovely little other field. And I suspect as we review data, if we see some trends in that other field, you better believe that next semester there'll be a checkbox for it. What is the timeline for making up a missed quiz or exam? So what is your expectation for that? And that may be, I posted in the syllabus and I say 1 week. Beautiful. The default guidelines suggest 1 week. You may have some predetermined dates, and you might put those in the comments for this question. All of that information is helpful. What is the reasonable timeline for making up the exam or quiz? What flexibility applies to short-term assignment deadlines? Short-term we define as less than a week to complete. Default guideline for that says up to 48 hours when accompanied by a disability-related absence. You may have a different way you want to handle that. You may say, I don't really care about deadlines. I'm not grading it today anyways. Put that in your plan, right? Anything that is helpful in understanding how you handle a response to an excused absence would be helpful. How does the accommodation apply to laboratories and laboratory activities, lab activities? When may absence notifications be auto-confirmed? And so there are a couple of options there. No, I don't want you to do that. Yes, here's the time frame. And then are there other course activities that or expectations that could be affected by an absence? And so it's a lovely little field that you can tell us, what questions did we not ask? What did we not address with the plan? So that really helps us kind of get into some of the minutia about your specific class. So I added this slide because I would imagine not just plan for absence students, but all students. What do we do with excused absences in online async classes? Online async is a really interesting challenge for us with the accommodation because flexibility is really built into a lot of online async experiences. I have found through talking with lots of instructors, there are kind of 2 types of online async classes. I don't want to overgeneralize, but the 2 that I see predominantly are, you've got 3 or 4 exams and some shorter assignments that may or may not apply to the accommodation. Or you've got kind of these bigger project-oriented classes where there's a lot of time to complete the project. And so the reality is maybe the accommodation doesn't apply the same way in these classes. But the thing I would encourage you to think about, do you have a process in your online async class that you go through when a student presents you with documentation for a university approved excused absence? How are you handling that for any other student? Remember my guiding question, take disability and accommodation out of this. How are you handling this for any other student with an excused absence? And you may already know that, okay? Second, do you have time specific activities? Are there time bounded activities where it is a short period of time where a disability flare could radically impact that timeline? And I go to migraines. I think migraines is an easy one. We kind of can relate to that. But if you have 3 days to complete an assignment and you've got a student who's going through a flare and a cluster of migraines, that event could affect a 3-day period versus if you have a month, the impact is a very different impact. And so what are those really time restricted, time specific, time bounded activities where an event like that could radically impact the timeline? And is there a point where the student's lack of progress and participation becomes excessive? Online async classes are challenging because a lot of it is activity based. Sorry, my computer just gave me a weird error. with online async classes, there's a lot of activities that we're sort of using to progress, to demonstrate progress and participation. And so I would just say, again, disability and accommodation outside of that, when is there a point where you know that the student is not going to benefit educationally? When are they not going to meet the objectives and outcomes? And I think that that's the way we sort of approach this discussion. I'm going to throw up this contact information. Wow, we got through that pretty quick. So I'm going to leave this contact information up for just a minute. It can camp out here. This is not the period at the end of the sentence. I believe you will have questions, and that's totally fine. I can't tell you the number of times I've talked to instructors. You are not on an island. And so I want you to feel like you can reach out and ask questions, especially as you're starting to think about how you complete the plan for your class. So you've got contact information here. I will stop. Christy, are there questions that you want to tackle out loud while we're here?
Oh, I have been busy, Justin. Don't you worry. There
Let's
have been
go.
questions and I've been trying to answer some and then some I said, let's go to Justin.
Let's
Um,
go.
so question about group projects
Mm-hmm.
and one trying to maintain student confidentiality, their
Yeah.
privacy, but then also what do you do with that? So a little bit about kind of the accommodations in general of how do we how do we do that?
Yep, it's really contextual. Christy knows, and I'll share. It depends, right? It depends on how the activity is set up, how prominent the group work is throughout the course of the semester. When I am talking with a student who has planned for absences, especially in classes, fields, experiences where they're going to be collaborating, I'm talking with them about how can you have a conversation with your teammates about the fact that there may be times you need to be out. And you don't have to give them a ton of details, or you've got students who want to overshare. You can throttle that however you want. But having a conversation with your peers is important. The instructor understands from an accommodation standpoint what that may look like, and the student is still responsible for following those processes. But we get into situations where students are reviewed by their peers. It could impact relationships. And I find that having that conversation proactively is really important. Um, if you have concerns about it, you could always reach out to the to the access coordinator. That's really important. And again, we're encouraging the student to do that. The only other thing that I would say regarding group work is that the accommodation is not meant to negate the the expectation and the outcome of these activities. So if group work is what we've chosen as a as a pedagogical method to engage students in those learning outcomes, then the reality is that the accommodation shouldn't supersede that. So group work collaboration is still expected. That's part of the learning outcome. And if the student doesn't have a plan for that, my advice would be reach out to the access coordinator. Now, what I would say about group work is that it is one of those check boxes in question two. And what I have seen instructors do in the past is say, when I have a student who's had to be out or miss for excused absences for group work, here's how I handle that. And just understanding how you would handle it for any other excused absence, I think is really helpful. We're really sort of getting at but what if we know there's going to be several excused absences? I've seen some instructors propose an alternative. Sometimes that doesn't work. And sometimes that's inequitable for the student. I think it's coaching on the front end to get the student to know how to talk about that with their peers and make sure that they follow processes with you to communicate when they need to be out.
Yeah. And I think kind of similarly, and we had another question about what about discussion classes
Yeah,
and, if a student's going to miss. I think one of the things with both of those
yeah,
is you can also talk to the student to
yeah,
say, when they talk to you about their accommodation, to say, so I want to make sure you understand, there's discussion in this class or there are group projects. Have you had that before? What has worked in those situations? And then, is that something you feel like would work here? So sometimes students are the ones that have the greatest information about what's worked for them. And then if not, you can always reach out to the access coordinator. That's listed in AIM, but I also put a link and we'll include it in the materials that we send out to the access coordinator assignment. So there is an access coordinator assigned to each college, and you can find that on our website. So I put that link there. And then as of last spring, we have academic liaisons for every department. So they have been trained by us in more in-depth knowledge of disability, of how our office works. They've had the opportunity, some of them went to this presentation this morning. So this is our second time today doing this presentation. And some of them were trained last year. So that's a person that you could reach out to if you have questions and maybe you don't want to ask us or they're somebody that's handy. So there, that list is on the provost office website, and I put a link there. Um,
I,
Another question, a
I,
couple real, go ahead, Justin.
Well, I was going to say one thing that I didn't mention, and I meant to on our online async class, is relevant really to the whole thing, but I think particularly for that. We have provided some rubrics on our website. So, off of that Plan for Absences website that Christy had dropped in the chat, there is a rubrics card that you can click on. These rubrics aren't the law. I just think they're a starting point to think about what is the length of time that the class, how frequent is it meeting? What is the length of time that the term is? What are some of the activities? These are some suggested starting points. Everything is individualized, course by course, activity by activity. But sometimes getting started is the hardest part. So we make those rubrics available for you to consider.
Okay, so are there a couple really kind of process related questions? If we have the auto confirm, so if they choose
Mhm.
auto confirm, will they get an email letting them
Yes.
know? Okay.
Yes, you will. I'm sorry, I didn't say that. Yes, you will get the email for your documentation. Everything from a notification standpoint still stands. It shows up in your FlexPlan portal. You just don't get reminders every couple of business days to go and approve it.
And then the other one was that we had a question about, and they got an email saying that the student had the flex plan, but they logged in to complete it and there wasn't one there. And I
Ooh.
said maybe the student dropped the class, but I didn't know if there could be another reason that you would know of.
Um, did you get the name of that instructor?
Yes,
I can go look and I will send you an email this afternoon. I'll see if I can
it
figure it.
was scroll, scroll, scroll. It was Peter. Mm, oh goodness, I gotta scroll back down. Um, I wrote
I'll
it down.
grab I'll grab the chat transcript. It's not a big
You'll
deal.
see it. There's a
Yeah.
lot in this chat, so I'm still learning.
Good. Hey,
Um,
good. Well, so here's the deal with that. It could be two things. If you're talking about the email for this event, this session, I targeted instructors who had students enrolled in their class with the plan for absences accommodation, not necessarily that they've requested it actively. And so I did that because I wanted you to be able to think about this ahead of the fact that they probably will request it. So it's possible that that's why you're not seeing the plan. It is possible that like Christy suggested, that they drop the class.
yeah.
I'll
Okay, so
find
I
it.
think you just answered another one of the questions. So you all got the email about this presentation because you have a student who is eligible to use the accommodations. Students are still requesting their letters now, and they will continue to do so. So once you get the actual email that says the student has made the request for accommodations, then you need to do the flex plan as soon as possible. Or if you've already done it, right, you're in good shape.
You are in good shape, and I'm going to say this, it's very likely they're going to request the accommodation. It just is. Because typically students who are approved for this accommodation, they do have flares and attendance can be a challenge. So if you got the email, it is a fairly safe bet that you'll have to fill out at some point. I would say fill it out now and then it's done and then it automatically applies and they can start making their request notifications and there's not a delay in the process for anybody.
Okay. And I'm getting a lot of questions about letters. So we started sending out accommodation letters, I think on Tuesday, might have been Monday. But that it does take something on our part. So students request them, and then we actually have to go in, and there's a mechanism for doing that. So given our situation with having to move out of offices and everything that happened over the weekend with the small fire in our building and the water damage, we might be a little bit slower in sending them, but we're getting them all sent out over the next few days. And they come in as students request them. So you may be seeing that you've got a bunch of requests, but maybe nobody who has the flex plan accommodation has requested yet. And I'm trying to look at some more. There's a bunch here. If they request accommodations after ad drop, we treat them the same as
Yep.
everybody else. It can be a problem if they've missed too many. Accommodations are not retroactive. So if they've already missed, those absences may be unexcused. But of course, we're looking at every student on a case by case basis. We're also
Yeah.
looking at the class. There's a lot involved. There's not necessarily black and white answers for much of what we do.
That's right. And a lot of times, this is a concern with instructors, especially when we're at like week 2, 3, 4. Well, we're already 4 weeks into the semester. I'm not going to fill out this plan because they've already missed classes. It's not about the student. It's about the course. So the plan applies to the course, not the individual student. My encouragement would be fill out the plan. And if the individual student has already missed too much, that's a separate conversation, but the plan applies to the course.
Yeah. And if you don't like the letters coming to your inbox, I understand that. You can have a filter and have a separate folder where all the letters go there. It's hard. We work with what was the number over 3,000 instructors in the spring. So you
Yeah,
all want different things, and we're trying to help make you all happy. Some people want the email, some don't. So we send the email, filter them to a folder. If you want to just use AIM, AIM, going into
AIM
AIM,
is
logging
great.
into AIM is the
Yep,
easiest way to do it.
yep,
But we have to have the emails going out, or else there'll be people who miss it.
that's right.
And I love David Baps. He's talking about talk with the student, help themselves,
So much.
help us. Again, over 3,000 students. What works with one class may not work for another. And we're also always happy to be part of that conversation. If you talk to a
100%.
student and you're like, we don't know what to do, we can't figure it out, bring in the access coordinator. Let us be helpful there too.
Yeah. We we've that's a lot of our work is being a bridge, and don't hesitate to reach out if you feel like a conversation needs to be had or there's just some confusion. That's what we're here for.
And I know Jack and David are both unmuted. I don't know if either one of you wanted to say something, but we're happy. We have a little bit of time.
Yeah.
just wanted to say it. I've been teaching an asynchronous class for with about 200 students every semester for the last few years, and I've had to deal with this flex plan stuff a few times.
Yeah.
Um, I think it all depends upon how one's class is set up. I think Jason is probably a little familiar with my class structure at this point because we've had to talk out some of the
Talked.
the surprising ways about how I designed my class, maybe. I think that uh, it's good to think about these things ahead of time, and that's one of the nice things about the flex plan.
Hey, I appreciate you saying that, both about the proactive sort of intentional planning, but also you make me you make you make it important for me to say that communication wins the day on all of this, right? It is so much easier when we communicate proactively about needs, and that could be the needs of the plan, the needs of the course, or on the student side, the needs of the student. And so, I'm thinking about some situations you and I have worked through, and communication wins the day when we do it the right way. This sets up the model, this sets up the framework, this sets up the medium to facilitate good communication proactively.
Yeah, my question is, first of all, I'm glad that we have a situation like this, that we're accommodating students, and also that you're improving it each year.
Yeah.
One thing I'd suggest is that on that August 17th message, since I'm the one that raised it, just put a clause at the end of it. No action is needed now, or something like that. Because I spent time looking at
Sorry
the
about that.
website. And it was informational, but I've got a grant I'm working on, and that had a little higher priority. So that's it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, for sure. Thank you for saying that
We love feedback. So
so
if you
much.
know, Justin and I, we want to improve all the time. We want to make it easy for you as much as possible. So I appreciate that feedback a lot.
Yeah.
Clint.
Yeah, I teach a lecture class, and what I really am concerned about is the exams. I had a flex person last semester, and sure enough, every exam it was time they wanted the extended time and so forth. And I don't know how you write that in a plan. You could miss all the lectures. My notes are online. My lectures with audios are online. They can get. So can you just say, don't miss any exams? Or?
Well, so it's challenging because, I use my daughter's example a lot. My daughter has epilepsy. She's 11, and stress is a trigger for her. When she is stressed, we will see an uptick in seizure activity. And I think the challenge with that is what accompanies exams: stress, fatigue, lack of sleep, right? And so it doesn't surprise me that this happens around exams, but again, we got to plan for it. And Professor McGill, I'd say, how are you handling excused absences? Let's take disability and accommodation out of it. If you've got a student who's presenting doctor's notes for exams, are you honoring those makeups? Is there an administrative reason why makeups can't happen the way, you know, you can't easily give a makeup. And so for me, it's I'm looking at why would we say no to a makeup, and are you saying yes, and in what circumstances?
I think the other challenge is, real briefly, is just that we know that a lot of these chronic conditions are exacerbated by lack of sleep, not
Yep,
eating well, stress.
yep,
And guess when that happens?
yep,
Exam times,
yep.
especially if they're being given at that 4 week, 8 week, when all of them are happening. So it's legit. It really stinks. Stinks for the faculty member, stinks for
It
the
stinks for
student.
the student.
And that's why the work that we do is really
Yeah.
complex, and we're trying to figure out for each student, what will work for them.
I- for-
Real quick, because we're almost out of
yeah.
time, I know Arnold had his hand raised, so I want to address that. And then if there's other questions in the chat, we will probably get back with you individually, or we'll put an
Yes,
answer into what we send out.
that's right.
Uh, I had a question. I, received all the emails, and I went
Mhm.
to the online place, and there was a student in my class who requested an accommodation, which I'm very happy to meet.
Yeah.
But her request for accommodation didn't have anything to do with absences. It was something completely different.
So you
It's
probably have more than one student,
Yep,
and only one has requested letters so far.
that's right.
And so I wasn't sure. It's still a mystery to me what buttons to click on to go in
It
and do these things and make the submission.
Yeah,
Uh,
for sure. So you got the email because we know that there's a student with the accommodation that's enrolled in one of your classes. So it was more of like a proactive, here's how to help you help the process. It is very likely they will request that. It is very likely you will get an email that says, hey, you have a flex plan to complete. I didn't actually catch your name. I'm sorry.
It's Vedlitz, V as in victory, Edlitz.
Yeah, did you send me an email
I
alongside another
did.
student? Yes, I will touch base with you and we can figure this out offline.
That'd be great. I'd really
Yeah,
like to do that.
my
That's
pleasure.
super.
Okay. And
Thank you, guys.
Sora has her hand raised too. And then if you have to drop off, we totally understand. Go
Hi,
ahead.
Thank you all.
yeah, hi, this is Sora from architecture, and I'm teaching a section that is coordinated with multiple instructors and a coordinator. And we're actually revising our syllabus actually today by until the end of tonight. And I'm wondering if adding this AIM accommodations portal link in our common syllabi. So I mean, it seems like the students should initiate this. It's not me. So they need to have this information where to begin at least,
Mhm.
or at least like something is there to
Sure.
help them kind of. And our entire body of student is like 200. We can't do this like one by one. So I think
Yeah.
it's gonna be very helpful if I can add a just a link, online link somewhere in our syllabus.
So, Sora, there is
Mhm.
an ADA required syllabus statement, and that's
Mhm,
how the
mhm.
process starts for a student. So
Okay.
that really is kind of where that goes. And then once they connect with us, we teach them all about how to use
Okay.
AIM
All
and
right.
what to do from there. So I think that statement is really, that's what you need. As
It's
long as
so
that's
yeah,
there,
pretty
we'll
much
work with
we already have it, and I think
that.
okay.
One
Yeah.
thing
Well,
that I've seen instructors do too is they'll develop sort of like a template that they send out to students with accommodation requests. I know folks over in Maze use it. I'm trying to think of, oh gosh, I'm not going to say the name because I'll butcher, but they have this template where, hey, I've got students with testing accommodations, so I've got a little templated statement about how I work with testing accommodations. You could develop out something like that for plan for absences. Say you get the letter from the student, hey, student, it's great to meet you. Here's how I support this. Here's sort of the reminders that I offer students who have that accommodation. And then you've got this boilerplate language that you could send to students, and you're kind of reminding them that way.
okay. I mean, we already have this college approved syllabus
Yeah,
about that, and it also includes all
for sure.
this ADA and all other things. So
Yeah.
I'm assuming that something is over there already.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thanks for hanging out for a little bit longer. I know some people had to go, but please contact Justin or me or your access coordinator if you have questions or your academic liaison. We want to help you. We want to collaborate with you, and we appreciate your time so much.
Thank y'all.